Three new defensive commitments for the Cardinals football program. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're talking about what Corey Thornton, Tayon Holloway, and Jordan Guerad bring to the Louisville program. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
Podcast on the Louisville Cardinals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As always, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Well, we've been in the midst of discussing every new transfer portal commitment for the Louisville Cardinals. Luckily for the show, but unlucky for the content scheduling, there has been a plethora of commitments over the past 6 days. On today's episode of the show, we're discussing three new defensive commitments: UCF cornerback Corey Thornton, North Carolina defensive back Tayon Holloway, and Florida International defensive lineman Jordan Guerad. We'll also discuss star wide receiver Jamari Thrash making his way to the NFL. So a lot of football talk. This will essentially, for the moment, conclude the individual analysis of every single portal addition up until this point. I appreciate you all tuning in, especially the live episodes. Tomorrow's episode will recap the basketball game against Kentucky and more, so be sure to stay tuned into that. I was thinking about doing a live episode for this show as well, but with this being recorded at about 4:45 on Thursday afternoon with the Kentucky game at 6 o'clock, I didn't really feel like it was fair to you all to have a live when a good amount of people weren't going to be able to make it anyway. So I was like, let's just record it and the audience can go back and listen at their leisure whenever they see fit. So that's what we're going to do today. I would like to have more live recordings of the show, and we're going to continue to do that. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Also, bear with me going through some yearly sinus issues. Unfortunately, this time of the year, they seem to come around every single year. So my throat is a little bit hoarse. I look like I haven't slept in about 6 weeks, but I do want to continue to churn out shows because there are a good amount of topics to discuss. Like today, there are three more commitments that we haven't discussed. The first segment, we'll talk about the defensive backs. There's two additions. One is a veteran that played for 4 years at Central Florida, Corey Thornton, 4-year letterman for the Knights program from the Miami area. So shout out to Coach Hova once again for not only going out and getting Miami transfers, but also players that are from the 305 area. The South Florida connection to Louisville, that pipeline continuing to strengthen and building up further and further. 6'1", 190-pound native of the Miami area. Played a good amount for UCF, multiple years starter, has 138 total tackles to his name, 24 pass deflections, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, and 4 interceptions. He was involved more in the coverage this year and had his best season in coverage with 3 interceptions. That is a career high. So looking at what he potentially brings to the table, I look at this as a potential stopgap in terms of experience. And that isn't meant to be disrespectful in any way. And actually it is, I think, probably to the contrary, because you are trusting a veteran guy to come in and help the team right away as you potentially lose all of your starting cornerbacks. And that sort of is the thing to focus on here, is that Storm Duck is off to the NFL, but there still hasn't been any news on the decisions of either Quincy Riley or Jarvis Brownlee. There are essentially three things that could happen. Number one, both of them come back. Number two, one of them comes back. And number three, neither of them comes back. I think if you made me go with my intuition, because this isn't inside information, I think I would probably go with option number two. I think one of them returns. Now, personally, I felt like Quincy Riley was 100% gone to the league. And then I heard some stuff last week that made me start to question that and say, well, maybe it's not a done deal like I thought. So we'll see what that means. You also have Jarvis Brownlee, who I've always felt like was 50-50 to return. I think if you're Louisville, if you get one of these players back, that's pretty solid. Thornton at that point would be able to compete for that other starting position. I don't think he's a penciled in starter for 2024. I think that there are some guys on the team at the moment, like maybe an Aaron Williams that could step up, a Marcus Washington, the transfer from Georgia with his second year in the program, etc. Trey Franklin as well. You do lose a good amount of players. So you were always going to add multiple players at the defensive back spot, especially at cornerback. You lose Derek Edwards to the transfer portal, Marquise Groves-Killebrew to the portal, Storm Duck. So at the very least, you're losing three with the potential to lose upwards of five. So even with the additions of Thornton and Tayon Holloway, who we're about to talk about, you're probably still looking to add maybe one to two more guys, depending on the status of Riley and Brownlee. But I like Thornton's ability to be solid in the running game, sort of like how Jarvis Brownlee is. You can never have too solid of tackling cornerbacks. And he had his best year in coverage for the Knights in 2023. So 1 year left in college. I think that this is a solid opportunity for both parties. Thornton gets to go to the Power 5 level, or not the Power 5 level, but gets to go to the ACC, to where I think you have a little bit more reputable of a program, although UCF is no slouch, and potentially compete for an ACC championship and possibly be a starter as well. Tayon Holloway, Tay for short, spent 2 seasons with North Carolina, was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school, redshirted in 2022. 2023, he played in 10 of the 12 games, had 19 tackles, 3 assists, 16 solo, 1 pass deflection, and no interceptions, no sacks, no forced fumbles. 5'11", 6 foot, native of Virginia Beach. Like I mentioned, former top 200 prospect, started the first 2 games of the year, played a good amount for the remainder of the season. When I've talked to a couple people around the program, not affiliated with the Tar Heels program, but they cover UNC, both of them told me different things, but they all kind of circled back to that the expectations for Holloway were a little bit higher than maybe what transpired on the field. And they also agreed that UNC's defensive scheme hasn't really put defensive backs in a great spot to succeed over the past couple seasons. So if you're a Louisville fan, you're hoping that Holloway, not having the greatest redshirt freshman campaign, might be contributed to that, to where maybe he comes over and plays like Cam Kelly did, to where Cam Kelly was extremely solid this past season for Louisville. Storm Duck, I feel like, had his up and down moments with the Cardinals, but Holloway, I think, feels a depth need, which is solid because he's already played at the Power 5 level. He has 1 season of experience under his belt, 2 in the collegiate program. So he has 3 years of eligibility left. He's already played 1 and has played a decent amount of snaps. So if you're looking for projecting towards the future, and maybe you're banking on one of Riley or Brownlee coming back, I feel like this really makes sense for Brom and company, because you have a multiple-year guy that can play himself into a starting level spot. If he gets it in 2024, that's great. If he is a depth piece, rotational in the 2 deep, to where, hey, he's more of a candidate for 2025 and he has a couple years to start. Well, that's also fantastic. So I like the flexibility here. I like the multiple years of eligibility. It makes sense for Holloway as well because I think this defense maybe suits defensive backs a little bit better than North Carolina's. Now, granted, you have to ask, well, really, how big of a role is he going to be able to play? Obviously, you are banking a lot on projection and potential, but if this is a depth piece with the potential for more, I like this. If this is a spot to where you're expecting Holloway to start right away, well, then you are asking a little bit more from the transfer cornerback. But I like both additions. I think it's a step in the right direction for a program that knew that defensive back was the number one need in the portal. So they did a good job of starting to address that. The Cardinals' defensive line got better over the past weekend when they added Florida International defensive lineman Jordan Guerad. The transfer defensive lineman actually was committed to Minnesota, but flipped to the Cardinals program. I like this move for Mark Ivey's unit. We'll talk about why here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has all the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals so that it makes hiring easy when you have that many qualified candidates. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours while using LinkedIn because thankfully with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. 3 defensive players added to the Cardinals program that we hadn't talked about before today. We just talked about the 2 defensive backs. We're going to talk about the third commitment who made his commitment last Saturday. I apologize for the delay in discussing his commitment. That is Florida International defensive lineman Jordan Guerad. It's spelled like Guerad, Guerad, but I saw a couple interviews where they pronounced it Gerard, so we'll go with that for the entirety of the episode. If it's wrong, then we'll correct it. I apologize, but we'll go with it until proven otherwise. But Guerad spent 3 seasons with Florida International, 6'3", 295-pound native of Valrico, Florida. There's that Sunshine State influence once again for the Cardinals program coming in handy. And what was very interesting is that usually when a player makes a commitment out of the transfer portal, a lot of times though they don't change that commitment, but we're seeing that trend a little bit more this offseason, and it benefited Louisville as they flipped Guerad, who was at the time committed to Minnesota, made his commitment to the Cardinals. A lot of people thought that maybe the Cardinals were going to be involved with Ainias Peebles, who was on campus. And when Brady Brom tweeted this out, obviously Brady Brom has been doing a great job of creating the hype for the program. Great ambassador for the recruiting department. When he tweets out the, so to speak, Brady bomb, insinuating that a commitment is coming, I got a message from someone saying, don't even try to guess who this is because you won't get it. And I'm sitting here going, okay, I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it ended up being pretty solid. I like what Guerad brings to the table. You have to think of, at this point in time, it feels like the starting level caliber defensive line, or the starters, have sort of been identified. You have Gelati and probably Mason Reiger on opposite sides. But the interior, you added FCS All-American Thor Griffith, who was very, very good for Harvard. Des Tell returns, who is one of the most underrated defenders in the ACC. There's a possibility that Jermaine Lole could come back, so that would be another starting level possible guy. So I think you're filling out depth. And that's what you have to remember, is that if you're looking to add depth, sometimes it's hard to convince guys that were starters at their previous spot to join a program to where they know that they're not going to start, but at least be in the rotation. And I'm not saying that as a way to say that Guerad is not good enough to potentially start, because I believe that he has the potential to be in the conversation. But I like this addition here. 84 career tackles for the interior lineman for the Panthers. He had 5 sacks in his career, had his first forced fumble this season as well. Looking at how he graded out, was one of the best defensive linemen in the group of 5, played in all 12 of the games, and played a ton of snaps in those games. First team All-Conference USA, also had an 83.3 PFF grade, which I think was like top 7 in the group of 5 for interior defensive linemen. So overall, great addition through the portal for depth reasons. I like this addition for 2 reasons. Number one, you continually add size and strength to the 2 deep. And that's not to say that there wasn't some already there, but a guy that is a veteran, has multiple years left, was, I think he only appeared in, looking at that 2021 campaign, he appeared in 4 games. So at this point, I'm led to believe that he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. So that's big time news, is that, adding the 1-year transfers is great, especially if they are a decorated player that has a ton of production to their name. But I like adding the multiple year guys because it creates a little bit of consistency. And that's not to bash on adding 1-year guys, because sometimes that is critical to do. But adding that consistency to where you don't have to absolutely reload your roster from a whole team perspective each and every offseason. So I like the additions of Jordan Guerad, of Tayon Holloway, because of the consistency there, the continuity, the multiple years of eligibility. That's number one. And number 2 is, I think that he has the tools to be pretty disruptive in the ACC as well. Obviously, with a non-Power 5 player, the main question you're wondering is, how are those skills going to translate to the Power 5? And I think with an underrated speed, being 6'3", almost 300 pounds, obviously the strength and size are there, but also has solid speed on the interior. I like this move. I think that this could be a move that we look at next fall, to where he makes some big time plays and you're thinking, oh, that's him. Okay, good move, Brom. Shout out to you. So I think that this is solid. Now you could say, well, Dalton, you've said that every move has been solid. Obviously, some moves are more solid than others, but Brom did a great job in the portal last year. The guys that he added, more often than not, made some big time plays. I think that that is the same case that is going to be had this year. Obviously, we're in wait and see approach, but on paper, I do like adding more depth to the defensive line. At this point in time, I think unless there is a ton of attrition to the room, I don't really look for Brom to add more players unless it's maybe another edge. But I mean, you have the guys that we mentioned, along with Jared Dawson, Tawfiq Thomas, Jeff Clark, etc. So maybe a couple players transfer out after the bowl game, which is coming up, which we are going to preview over the weekend, post-Christmas, and leading up to spring ball as well. The transfer portal comes in waves. There's the first initial wave, then there's after bowl season wave, and then there's right around spring training wave. And last year, Louisville benefited from all 3 waves. And the first wave seemingly is done, maybe minus 1 player, and it's been very, very fruitful for this program. I like what the Cardinals have added across the board, both via starting positions and projected depth guys. So Three guys that I look to play a capacity or play a role in some capacity this upcoming fall in 2024. So it's been a lot of great news, some bummer news that we kind of saw coming, but it seemed like there was maybe a little bit of hope, was Jamari Thrash returning for another year, but the former Georgia State star decided that it was time to test the NFL draft waters. It's expected, truthfully, but Jamari Thrash succeeding at Louisville creates a huge silver lining that I think is very notable, that hasn't gotten talked about a ton, that we're going to identify and discuss in the final segment after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. The weather's getting colder. As always, you can tell via my sinuses, but the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Jamari Thrash going to the NFL shouldn't surprise you. I mean, that we held out a little bit of hope, right? There were rumblings that him going to the NFL wasn't necessarily a done deal, that maybe there was some solid NIL money that could convince him to stay. But at the end of the day, Thrash entering the draft makes a ton of sense. I mean, he's played 5 collegiate seasons, and there's really not much more to prove. Now, granted, statistically, he took a step back, 63 catches for 858 yards with 6 touchdowns. But when you factor in that he spent a good amount of the back half of the schedule hurt, Louisville's offense really was run dominant, especially down the stretch. I mean, I don't think that there was really much more for Thrash to prove. And more importantly, I'm not really sure how much more he could have improved his draft stock. So that is one of the silver linings, the main silver lining we'll talk about here in a second. But at this point in time, I've seen Thrash in a couple third-round mocks. And if he's getting mocked to the third round, then I can't really see his value in terms of NFL draft stock getting any higher in 2025. Albeit considerably higher. So it makes sense. I appreciate everything that Jamari was able to do here. He showed that, look, not many defensive backs could check him. So he showed that, hey, look, I could do it at the Power 5 level. I can really, really cause a difference. And he did just that. So thank you, Jamari, for what you were able to come here to do. Thank you for the production, the contributions to 10 regular season wins, etc. We talked about a silver lining, and I think that there is one. What were the main parallels on offense in 2021 and 2022? What parallels can be drawn from both of those 2 years? 2022 to 2023, not 2021. 2022, 2023. There's a main parallel. And it doesn't matter the coaching staff. I mean, it does, but it doesn't because of the trend. And there is an opportunity for this trend to continue in 2024. But 2022, your number one wide receiver came from a non-Power 5 transfer. Tyler Hudson, Central Arkansas, showed that he could ball out at the Power 5 level. Obviously, different schemes from Satterfield to Braum. I would have loved to have seen Tyler Hudson in a Braum offense, but was pretty solid under Sat. 2023, your number one receiver is a non-Power 5 transfer, Jamari Thrash, showing that he can do it at the Power 5 level. You're starting at this point to create some positive recruiting momentum that you can go with to top players at the group of 5 level who, you say, well, I mean, you're playing with a lot of risk there because not every Group of 5 player transfers into the Power 5 and has a ton of success. But there are a good amount of those Group of 5 guys that absolutely ball out, and a good amount of players or a good amount of teams are after them. One of them being South Alabama wide receiver Colin Lacey, who has committed to the Louisville program, is a slot receiver, but could be wide receiver 1 for the Cardinals in 2024. I like this trend on offense because of how the portal is starting to shake up recruiting overall. I think that this can help the Cardinals is because not only does Jeff Brom incorporate a very wide receiver friendly offensive scheme, but you also now have the track record with this program, sort of like you do with the South Florida guys. Like, hey, look, I understand that it's convenient and popular to stay in state, but look, a lot of guys have carved out their journey here at Louisville, and it makes a lot of sense, and you can get to the NFL. You can have a ton of success while playing on TV and in a major conference as well. Now you're going to top Group of 5 FCS receivers and saying, hey, look, this is an offense that can be tailor-made to your skill set, and there is a track record of getting these types of players, speaking of non-Power 5 receivers and skill level guys, to a spot to where they are given the opportunity to shine, to improve their draft stock, and go on to the NFL and win games while you do it on a Power 5 level. That's the silver lining for me. And although you're thinking, well, in the grand scheme of things, how large is that silver lining? Well, I don't know. You tell me, how critical was Tyler Hudson to the Cardinals offense? How many games does Louisville win if they don't have Jamari Thrash? How many wide receivers in the portal right now are better than Colin Lacey? Well, according to On3, there's 3 better receivers. Maybe your wide receiver 1 is Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama. That is to be determined. But Colin Lacey is one of probably the best non-Power 5 receiver, not only in the portal, maybe in all of college football. So just a small silver lining, a small trend that I started to discuss with some friends when we got the commitment from Jamari Thrash. Like, hey, look, I think you could start a trend here. And then when you saw that Thrash was able to have a solid season, you got the commitment from Lacey, and I'm like, okay, this really does make sense. So great season from Thrash overall. Going to miss him. Thank you very much, Jamari, for everything you did in your season here in the Derby City. So we are finally done discussing all of the new coming transfer portal additions for the Cardinals. Thanks for tuning in to the 5 episodes that we've discussed the commitments on, whether they be live episodes or just recorded episodes. But I want to talk about the content that's going to be coming up. We'll talk about, obviously, the Kentucky game after, I believe, on Fridays when we'll discuss it. We'll preview the upcoming matchup against USC in the Holiday Bowl and more. So be sure to stay tuned into the show, but we will see you right back here